What happens when a joke meant to make me look powerful ends with legal papers in my hand and my husband watching from across the street? How could one careless, smiling remark turn into the final receipt of our marriage? I should have known better. But there I was, sitting in our open-plan kitchen with 3 of my closest friends, feeling invincible after 2 glasses of wine and their laughter at my stories about work drama. The townhouse felt warm and alive with conversation, candles flickering on the granite countertops, jazz playing softly from the speakers Caleb had installed last spring when he still cared about making me happy. "Honestly, Ivadne, I don't know how you do it," Michelle said, swirling her wine. "If David acted half as uptight as Caleb does about everything, I'd lose my mind." I felt that familiar surge of validation. Michelle always knew exactly what to say to make me feel understood. "Trust me, some days I wonder what I was thinking when I married him." "He's not that bad," Sarah offered weakly, but I could tell she was just being polite. Everyone knew Caleb was too serious, too controlled, too boring. "Please," I laughed, feeling bold and clever. "The man color codes his sock drawer and schedules our grocery trips. I swear, sometimes I feel more like his assistant than his wife." The wine made everything funnier, made my complaints sound wittier than they probably were. I was building to something, I could feel it. The perfect line that would cement my position as the confident, independent woman who didn't need anyone's approval. "Besides," I said, leaning back in my chair with what I thought was a charming smile, "I could swap him out any time I wanted. Men like Caleb are a dime a dozen." The words hung in the air for exactly 3 seconds before I heard it, the sound of his chair scraping the floor behind me. My blood turned to ice water. I'd said it lightly, like a clever line, smiling at my friends like I was untouchable. Then the room shifted. Caleb was standing in the doorway, still holding the bag of desserts he'd picked up on the way home from his late meeting, because he thought we were having a good night. He didn't storm in. He didn't insult me. He just set the bag down on the counter with deliberate calm and said very quietly, "Then do it. Swap me out." The worst part was that his voice didn't shake. It was steady, like he'd finally been given permission to stop trying. Michelle's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. Sarah suddenly found her phone fascinating. The jazz kept playing, but it felt like mockery now. "Caleb, I started, but he held up one hand. "No, Ivadne, you were just being honest, finally." His grey eyes met mine across the kitchen island, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not hurt, something worse, resignation. "I appreciate the clarity." I wanted to chase him as he walked toward the stairs, wanted to explain that it was just girl talk, just wine, making me say stupid things. But my pride kept me sitting there, smiling too long, until it looked like cruelty. "Well," Michelle said after we heard his study door close upstairs. "That was awkward." "He'll get over it," I said, but my voice sounded hollow even to me. "He always does." But as my friends made their excuses and left earlier than usual, I had the sinking feeling that this time might be different. This time, I might have pushed too far. I found him in his study an hour later, typing on his laptop with the focused intensity he usually reserved for work projects. "Caleb, come on. You know I didn't mean anything by it. I was just venting with the girls." He didn't look up from the screen. "I heard what you meant. Don't be dramatic. It was a joke." "Was it?" Now he did look at me, and his expression was unreadable. "Because it sounded like you've given this some thought." "Oh my God, you're being ridiculous. So I made one comment about how you're a little structured. Sue me." "Structured." He repeated the word like he was tasting something bitter. "Is that what we're calling it?" "What would you call it? You literally have a spreadsheet for our monthly expenses broken down by category and subcategory. You schedule our date nights 6 weeks in advance. I try to make our life work smoothly," he said quietly. "I thought that's what partners did for each other." The word partners hit differently than it should have, like he was already speaking in past tense. "They do. We do." I'm sorry, okay? I had too much wine and I was showing off. It won't happen again. He saved whatever he was working on and closed the laptop. You're right about one thing, Ivadne. It won't happen again. He walked past me toward the bedroom, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Not guilt, I wasn't ready for that yet, but the first whisper of fear that maybe, for the first time in our 5-year marriage, Caleb wasn't going to let me smooth this over with an apology and a promise to do better. I spent the next hour scrolling through my phone, looking at the photos Michelle had posted from tonight. There I was, laughing and gesturing with my wine glass, looking confident and carefree. The woman in those pictures didn't look like someone whose marriage was in trouble. She looked like someone in control. That's what I told myself as I finally went to bed, finding Caleb already asleep, with his back to my side of the mattress. It was just a fight, a misunderstanding. By morning, he'd remember that he loved me, and we'd move past this like we always did. But when I woke up, his side of the bed was already cold, and I could hear him downstairs making coffee for one. The next morning felt different. Not just quiet. Caleb was always quiet in the mornings, but deliberately empty. He'd made coffee, but only enough for himself. He'd taken his usual bowl and spoon for cereal, but left no place setting for me. Small things that might have been oversight in another marriage, but felt intentional in ours. "Good morning," I said, trying to sound normal as I padded into the kitchen in my robe. "Morning." He didn't look up from his phone as he ate. "Are we really going to do this? The silent treatment over something I said while drinking with friends?" "I'm not giving you the silent treatment. I said good morning." "You know what I mean." He finished his cereal, rinsed the bowl, and put it in the dishwasher with the same methodical precision he brought to everything. "I'm working late tonight, don't wait up." "Caleb." But he was already grabbing his keys and heading for the garage. A minute later, I heard his car backing out of the driveway. I stood in the kitchen, still in my robe, feeling foolish and angry in equal measure. This was exactly the kind of overreaction I'd been complaining about to my friends. One offhand comment, and he was acting like I'd committed some unforgivable sin. By the time I got to work, I'd convinced myself that he was being childish. Michelle had texted me 3 times, asking if everything was okay and apologizing for the awkwardness. I told her not to worry about it. Caleb would come around once he stopped being so sensitive. But as the day wore on, something nagged at me. It wasn't like him to hold grudges. Usually, after our fights, he'd text me by lunch with some small peace offering, a funny meme, or asking if I wanted him to pick up dinner. My phone stayed silent. At 3 o'clock, my sister Lynn called. "So Michelle told Sarah, who told Jennifer, who told me that you had some drama with Caleb last night." I sighed. "It's nothing. I made a stupid joke and he took it the wrong way." "What kind of joke?" "Just, you know how he is. All serious and scheduled. I said something about how I could swap him out any time and he overheard." Silence on the other end. "Lynn? Jesus, Ivadne, you said that in front of people." "It was a joke. It was mean and humiliating, in his own house with his food and wine while he was bringing you dessert." I felt my defenses rising. "Since when are you Team Caleb?" "Since always. He's a good guy, Ivy. He loves you, and you just told your friends you could replace him like a broken appliance." "You're being dramatic." "Am I? Because if Tom said that about me to his buddies, I'd be packing his bags." The call ended with Lynn promising to stay out of it, in a tone that suggested she thought I was completely in the wrong. I spent the rest of the afternoon alternating between irritation and a growing unease that maybe I had crossed a line. When I got home, Caleb's car wasn't in the driveway. True to his word, he was working late. I ordered Thai food and ate it alone while scrolling through social media, trying to distract myself from the unusual quiet in our house. Around 9, I decided to text him. "Hey, I know you're upset, but can we talk when you get home? I really am sorry." 3 hours later, when I was already in bed, I heard his car in the driveway. He came upstairs quietly, showered in the guest bathroom, and slept in the guest room. The silent treatment I'd accused him of giving me that morning was nothing compared to this. This felt like abandonment. The next few days followed the same pattern. Polite, distant interactions, separate meals, separate bedrooms. He wasn't cruel or dramatic. Somehow, that would have been easier to handle. Instead, he was simply absent, present in body but checked out emotionally. On Thursday, I tried a different approach. I was thinking we could go to dinner this weekend, that new Italian place you mentioned. I have plans this weekend. What plans? Personal plans. The word personal stung. Since when did Caleb have personal plans that didn't include me? With who? Does it matter? It did matter, but I couldn't figure out how to say that without sounding possessive and hypocritical. After all, I was the one who'd essentially announced to our friends that he was replaceable. Friday evening, I was determined to fix things. I cooked his favorite dinner, chicken parmesan with the expensive cheese he liked, and opened a bottle of the wine we'd been saving for our anniversary. I lit candles, put on the dress he'd complimented me on last month, and waited. He came home at 7:30, saw the setup, and paused in the doorway. "What's this?" "Dinner. I thought we could talk." "I already ate." "Caleb, please, I know I screwed up. I know what I said was hurtful, and I'm sorry. Really, truly sorry. Can we please just move past this?" He stood there for a long moment, looking at the candles and the wine and me in my dress, and I thought I saw something soften in his expression. "Okay," he said finally. "Let's talk." Relief flooded through me as he sat down across from me at the dining room table. "I was showing off," I began. "It was stupid and thoughtless, and I hurt you. I don't actually think you're replaceable, Caleb. I love you. I love our life together." He nodded slowly. "I believe you love our life. The question is whether you love me or just the stability I provide." "Of course I love you. How can you even ask that?" "Because for the past 2 years you've been treating me like a convenience rather than a partner. The comment the other night wasn't a slip of the tongue, Ivadne. It was how you really see me." "That's not true." "Isn't it? When's the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? When's the last time you initiated physical affection that wasn't leading somewhere? When's the last time you defended me to your friends instead of using me as material for your complaints?" Each question hit like a small slap, because the truth was, I couldn't remember. "Marriage isn't a performance," he continued. "It's not about who can sound the wittiest at dinner parties. It's about respect and partnership and actually liking the person you chose to build a life with. And I don't think you like me very much anymore." "I do like you," I protested, but it sounded weak even to me. "You like what I do for you. You like that I handle the bills and maintain the house and remember your mother's birthday. But me, as a person, I don't think you've seen me as a person in a long time." I wanted to argue, but the words wouldn't come. Because somewhere deep down, I knew he was right. Somewhere along the way, Caleb had become background music in my life. Pleasant, reliable, but not really worth paying attention to. "So, what are you saying?" I asked quietly. "I'm saying I need some time to think about whether this marriage is working for either of us." "Time apart?" "Time to figure out if we want the same things, if we even like each other anymore." He stood up from the table, leaving the untouched dinner and wine between us. "Thank you for cooking. It looks beautiful. But I think I need some space tonight." I sat alone at the candlelit table, staring at the meal I'd prepared like an offering, and felt the first real stab of fear that I might have broken something I couldn't fix. The weekend Caleb spent away from home was the longest 2 days of our marriage. He'd packed a small bag Friday night, kissed my forehead like I was his sister, and said he'd be back Sunday evening. He wouldn't tell me where he was going, just that he needed to think. I spent Saturday cleaning the house obsessively, as if having perfect baseboards would somehow prove I was wife material. Sunday, I called my mother. He's being ridiculous, Mom said predictably. You made one little comment, and he's acting like you cheated on him. Honestly, Ivadne, maybe this is a blessing in disguise. Do you really want to spend your life walking on eggshells around someone so sensitive? I don't want to walk on eggshells. I just want him to come home. Well, when he does, don't grovel. You're a catch, honey. If he can't handle a strong woman with opinions, that's his problem. But even as I nodded along with her familiar refrain, something felt off about framing this as Caleb being unable to handle my strength. What I'd said wasn't strong, it was cruel. And the more I replayed that night, the more I remembered the look on his face when he'd set down that bag of desserts. He came home Sunday evening, as promised, but something fundamental had shifted. He was polite, even kind, but distant in a way that felt permanent. Like he'd made a decision during those 2 days, and was now simply managing the aftermath. How was your weekend? I asked as he unpacked his bag. Productive, he said. I had some good conversations. With who? My dad, my sister, some other people. The fact that he'd talked to his family about our problems without including me felt like another small betrayal. But I bit my tongue. I was supposed to be proving I could be the wife he needed. What did they say? That marriage is work, but it shouldn't be this hard. Over the next few weeks, we settled into a new normal that felt like playing house with a polite stranger. Caleb was present for all the practical aspects of our life. He still handled his share of chores, still contributed to conversations about bills and schedules, but the emotional intimacy was gone. We were roommates who shared a mortgage and a last name. The worst part was how reasonable he was being. I couldn't even complain to my friends about his behavior, because he wasn't doing anything wrong. He was just absent, emotionally unavailable in a way that made me feel crazy for wanting more. 3 weeks after our dinner conversation, I was having lunch with Michelle when she brought up something I'd been dreading. So, is everything okay with you and Caleb? Because Jennifer saw him at that new coffee place downtown last weekend, and he was with some woman. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. What woman? She didn't recognize her. Blonde, maybe our age. They were sitting pretty close, talking for like 2 hours. The jealousy hit me like a physical blow. Did Jennifer say anything to him? She didn't want to interrupt, but she said he looked happy, like really happy, more relaxed than she'd seen him in years. I spent the rest of lunch pretending I wasn't falling apart inside. Caleb was having coffee dates with other women. Caleb, who scheduled our grocery trips and color-coded his sock drawer, was apparently capable of spontaneous social interactions when I wasn't around. That night, I confronted him. Michelle said Jennifer saw you with some woman at a coffee shop. He looked up from his laptop. Okay. That's it. Okay. What would you like me to say? How about who she was, or why you didn't mention you were meeting another woman? I don't recall agreeing to provide you with a detailed itinerary of my social activities. The formal tone stung worse than anger would have. Social activities? Since when do you have social activities that don't include me? Since I realized I'd forgotten how to have conversations that didn't revolve around household logistics. So you're dating now? I'm having coffee with a friend, something I should have been doing all along, instead of making you my entire social world. What's that supposed to mean? It means I've been so focused on being the husband you needed that I forgot to be a person you might actually want to spend time with. I stared at him, trying to process what felt like a fundamental rewriting of our relationship history. I do want to spend time with you. Do you? Because for the past 2 years, every conversation we've had has been either about practical matters or complaints about how I don't meet your expectations. When's the last time you asked me about something I was interested in? When's the last time you seemed genuinely happy to see me walk through the door? I opened my mouth to argue, then closed it, because he was right and we both knew it. Her name is Amanda, he said quietly. She's a colleague's sister. She's going through a divorce, and we talked about what it's like when a marriage becomes a business partnership instead of a relationship. Are you attracted to her? That's not the point. It is to me. He closed his laptop and looked at me directly. The point is that I spent 2 hours talking to someone who seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say, who laughed at my jokes and asked follow-up questions and made me remember what it felt like to be seen as more than a provider and a problem solver. I see you as more than that. When? When do you see me as more than that? I struggled for an answer that didn't sound defensive or hollow. I thought so, he said. And that's not entirely your fault, Ivadne. I let it happen. I was so afraid of conflict, so determined to be the perfect husband, that I turned myself into a service provider instead of a partner. But that night, when you told your friends you could swap me out any time, that's when I realized you'd been seeing me that way for a long time. So you're punishing me. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference. He stood up, gathering his laptop and papers. I'm going to finish this in my study. Good night. I sat alone in our living room, surrounded by the furniture we'd picked out together, the photos from our wedding and vacations, the life we'd built that suddenly felt like evidence of a crime I didn't remember committing. The next morning, I found a notebook on the kitchen counter. Caleb's handwriting, neat and precise as always, filled several pages. At the top, he'd written, "Things to remember." I flipped through it, my heart sinking with each entry. Ivadne complained about my boring stories at the Hendersons' party, March 15th, made joke about my obsessive organizing in front of her co-workers, April 2nd, rolled her eyes when I mentioned wanting to visit Dad, April 20th, called me predictable when I suggested staying in for her birthday, May 8th. Page after page of small moments I'd forgotten, but he'd carefully documented, not with anger or self-pity, but with the methodical precision he brought to everything, like he was building a case. When he came downstairs for coffee, I was still holding the notebook. "You've been keeping track," I said. "I've been trying to understand when we stopped being a team. This makes me look horrible. It's not meant to make you look anything. It's meant to help me see patterns." "What patterns?" "That you stopped liking me a long time ago, but you've been too comfortable to leave." The accusation hung between us like a challenge, and the terrible thing was, I couldn't deny it. Somewhere along the way, Caleb had become a fixture in my life rather than a person I'd chosen to love. Safe, reliable, boring Caleb, who handled the practical stuff while I focused on more interesting things. "I do like you," I said weakly. "You like the life we've built. You like not having to worry about bills or home maintenance or remembering social obligations. But me, as a person? I don't think you've been genuinely interested in me as a person in years." He poured his coffee and headed toward the door. "I'll be home late again tonight. Amanda and I are going to a lecture at the university." "A lecture? About urban planning? Something I've always been interested in, but never mentioned, because you've made it clear you find my interests boring." After he left, I called in sick to work and spent the day reading through his notebook, trying to remember the context for each entry. The worst part wasn't that he was wrong, it was that he was completely right. I had been dismissive, critical, condescending. I'd turned him into a supporting character in my own life story. But instead of the guilt and self-reflection that might have saved us, I felt something else rising in my chest. Resentment. Because if he'd been unhappy for years, why hadn't he said something? Why had he let me become the villain in a story I didn't even know I was writing? By the time he came home that night, I'd worked myself into a defensive fury. "If you've been this miserable for years, why didn't you speak up sooner?" "I tried. You weren't interested in hearing it." "When? When did you try?" "Every time I suggested we talk about our relationship and you changed the subject. Every time I asked if we could spend more time together and you said you were too busy. Every time I tried to share something I cared about and you made it clear it wasn't worth your attention. So this is all my fault. This is both our faults, but only one of us is willing to admit it." That night, I lay awake in our bed. He'd moved permanently to the guest room. and tried to figure out when exactly I'd stopped seeing my husband as a person worth knowing, and whether it was too late to remember how. The thing about small towns is that everyone knows everyone else's business, especially when that business involves public humiliation at dinner parties. By the time a month had passed since my swap him out comment, it had taken on a life of its own in our social circle. What started as Michelle's innocent retelling had morphed through the telephone game of gossip into something much worse. According to the version that made its way back to me through Sarah, I had apparently announced to everyone that Caleb was disposable and laughed when he looked hurt. Jennifer's version had me flirting with other men right in front of him and telling everyone he was boring in bed. None of it was exactly true, but none of it was entirely false either, and the court of public opinion had clearly reached a verdict. I first noticed it at the grocery store when Linda Morrison, who'd been friendly with me for years, suddenly became very interested in her shopping list when she saw me coming down the cereal aisle. Then, it was David Chen avoiding eye contact at the gas station. Small things that might have been coincidence, but felt deliberate. The final confirmation came when Michelle cancelled our usual Friday night plans. "I'm just super busy with work stuff," she said, but I could hear the lie in her voice. "Rain check. Is this about Caleb?" "What? No, of course not, Michelle, are people talking?" A pause that lasted too long. "People always talk, Ivy, you know that." "What are they saying?" "Nothing important, just maybe give it some time, let things cool down." After I hung up, I sat in my car outside the office building where I'd been meeting her for drinks every Friday for 3 years, and felt the weight of social exile settling around me like a heavy coat. That weekend, Caleb went to his sister Lydia's birthday party without me. "You weren't invited," he said matter-of-factly when I asked why he hadn't mentioned it. "What do you mean I wasn't invited? I'm your wife." "And Lydia made it clear that she doesn't want you there. She can't just uninvite me from family events. She can, actually, it's her birthday." I called Lydia directly, something I'd never done before. We'd always had a polite but distant relationship. She was 8 years younger than Caleb and had never seemed to approve of me. "Hi Lydia, it's Ivadne. I think there might be some confusion about your party tonight." "No confusion," she said coolly. "I didn't invite you." "Can I ask why?" "Because I don't want someone at my party who thinks my brother is disposable." "That's not what It's exactly what you said, in front of people, in his own house, while he was bringing you dessert." The way she said dessert made it sound like evidence of his sainthood. It was a stupid joke that got blown out of proportion. "Was it? Because from where I sit, it looks like you've been treating him like garbage for years, and you finally said the quiet part out loud. You don't know anything about our marriage." "I know my brother. I know he's been making excuses for your behavior for years, and I know he deserves better than someone who thinks he's a punchline." She hung up before I could respond. I spent that Saturday night alone, scrolling through social media and watching my friends post pictures from events I hadn't been invited to. Caleb came home late, slightly drunk and happier than I'd seen him in months. "How was the party?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Good, really good. I'd forgotten how much I like my family when I'm not constantly apologizing for my wife's behavior." The comment was delivered so matter-of-factly that it took a moment to register as the devastating blow it was. "I've never made you apologize for anything." "Haven't you? Every eye roll when I tell a story they find interesting. Every time you check your phone when my dad talks about his woodworking. Every dismissive comment about my boring job or my obsessive hobbies. I've been running damage control for years. That's not fair. Isn't it? Tonight I had actual conversations with people who know me, who remember that I used to be funny, before I got so worried about managing your moods that I forgot how to be myself." He headed upstairs, then paused. "Oh, and Amanda was there. Lydia invited her." "Amanda? Your coffee friend?" "My friend, yes. Turns out she and Lydia know each other from yoga class. Small world. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. So this is all connected. Your family, your new friend, your sudden social life that doesn't include me. It's not sudden, Ivadne. It's just separate from you, something I should have maintained all along. Are you sleeping with her? That's the question you want to ask, not whether I'm happy or whether I'm getting something from these relationships that I haven't gotten at home in years. Just whether I'm sleeping with her. Are you? No, but not because I'm not attracted to her, and not because she hasn't made it clear the interest would be welcome. The honesty was brutal. So why not? Because I'm still married to you, and despite everything, I still take that seriously. But you're thinking about it. I'm thinking about a lot of things. That night, I did something I'd never done before. I went through his phone. He'd left it charging on the kitchen counter, and I knew his passcode because he'd never hidden it from me. What I found was worse than explicit messages or secret plans. I found evidence of a full life I knew nothing about. Group texts with his college friends about a monthly poker game he'd apparently been attending for 6 months. Messages with his sister about family events I hadn't been told about. A long conversation with his father about visiting for Christmas. Just him, not us. And yes, messages with Amanda. But they weren't romantic. They were real. Conversations about books and movies and ideas. The kind of conversations I couldn't remember ever having with him. She asked about his work and seemed genuinely interested in the answers. She shared articles she thought he'd find interesting. She treated him like someone worth knowing. Reading those messages, I realized I was jealous not of a sexual relationship, but of an emotional intimacy I'd never bothered to build with my own husband. The next morning, I tried a different approach. I was thinking we could take a weekend trip somewhere. Just us. Maybe that bed and breakfast in Asheville you mentioned last year. I don't think that's a good idea right now. Why not? Because you're trying to fix something you don't understand is broken. Then help me understand. I've been trying to help you understand for months. You're not interested in understanding, Ivadne. You're interested in getting back to the comfortable status quo where I provide stability and you provide... What exactly? The question hung in the air like a challenge I couldn't meet. I provide partnership, companionship, love. When? When do you provide those things? Not in our conversations, which are mostly about logistics. Not in our social life, where you treat me like an embarrassment. Not in our physical relationship, which has been basically non-existent for the past year. That's not true. When's the last time you initiated sex? When's the last time you kissed me hello when I came home from work? When's the last time you asked about my day and actually listened to the answer? I couldn't answer any of those questions, and we both knew it. I'm trying now, I said weakly. You're trying to avoid consequences. That's different from trying to be a better partner. He finished his coffee and headed toward the door. I'm having dinner with Amanda tonight. We're going to that new sushi place downtown. The one I said I wanted to try? The one you said looked too fancy and probably overpriced. So you're taking her instead. I'm taking someone who's excited to try new things instead of finding reasons why they won't work. After he left, I sat in our kitchen and tried to remember when I'd become the kind of person who found reasons why things wouldn't work instead of reasons why they would. When I'd stopped being someone worth taking to dinner. But instead of the self-reflection that might have saved my marriage, I felt anger rising in my chest. Because if he wanted someone more adventurous, more appreciative, more interested in his boring hobbies and predictable stories, then maybe he should have married someone else in the first place. Maybe it was time I gave him exactly what he'd asked for that night. Maybe it was time I swapped him out. I should have seen the signs. Looking back, they were everywhere. The way Caleb had started organizing his papers into neat stacks, the sudden appearance of file folders labeled in his precise handwriting, the fact that he'd begun treating our conversations like depositions rather than discussions. But I was too focused on my own wounded pride to notice that my husband was building a case. The dinner with Amanda had been the final straw for me, not because I was jealous, though I was, but because it felt like he was deliberately flaunting his new life in my face. So I decided to fight fire with fire. "I'm going out Friday night," I announced over breakfast. "Okay," he said without looking up from his phone. "With people from work, we're going to that new bar downtown. Have fun." His complete lack of interest stung worse than jealousy would have. I was hoping for questions, for some sign that he still cared what I did or who I did it with. Instead, I got the polite indifference he might show a roommate. Friday night, I met my co-workers at Murphy's Tavern, a trendy place that had opened 6 months ago in the renovated historic district. It felt good to be out, to be around people who didn't know about my marital problems or judge me for a stupid comment I'd made weeks ago. That's where I met Jason. He was a friend of my co-worker Beth's boyfriend, tall, charming, with an easy smile, and the kind of confidence that made you feel interesting just by talking to you. He bought me drinks, laughed at my jokes, and treated me like someone worth flirting with. "You're married," he said, noticing my ring. "Technically," I replied, and felt a thrill at the admission. "Technically? Let's just say it's complicated." We talked for hours, about work, about movies, about travel and dreams, and all the things Caleb and I had stopped discussing years ago. Jason was a freelance photographer, the kind of creative type who lived spontaneously and found adventure in ordinary moments. Everything Caleb wasn't. When he asked for my number, I gave it to him. I came home that night feeling more attractive and interesting than I had in months. Caleb was already asleep in the guest room, and I felt a vindictive satisfaction that he had no idea what he was missing. Jason texted me the next morning. "Had a great time talking with you last night. Would love to continue the conversation over coffee sometime." I stared at the message for a long time before responding. "I'd like that." We met that Tuesday at a cafe across town, somewhere I was unlikely to run into anyone I knew. It felt deliciously secretive, like I was finally doing something for myself instead of managing everyone else's expectations. Jason was even more charming in daylight. He asked about my work, my interests, my dreams, all the questions Caleb had stopped asking years ago. When I complained about feeling unappreciated at home, he listened with the kind of focused attention that made me feel validated and understood. "Your husband sounds like he takes you for granted," he said. "He does. I mean, I try to be supportive, but nothing I do is ever enough. He's always finding fault with something." "That's not fair to you. You deserve someone who sees how amazing you are." The words were like a balm to my wounded ego. Here was someone who appreciated me, who saw value in the things Caleb criticized. We started meeting regularly. Coffee, lunch, long walks in the park. I told myself it was just friendship, just someone to talk to who understood what I was going through. But I knew it was more than that, and so did Jason. 3 weeks into our friendship, he kissed me. I should have stopped it, should have pulled away, gone home, tried to fix my marriage instead of looking for validation elsewhere. But it felt so good to be wanted, to be seen as desirable instead of tolerated, that I kissed him back. "I should go," I said afterward, but I didn't move away from him. "Should you? Or do you think you should because that's what you're supposed to say?" "I'm married." "Are you? Because from everything you've told me, it sounds like you're just two people sharing a house and a mortgage." He wasn't wrong. That's exactly what Caleb and I had become. I started staying out later, making excuses about work events and girls' nights that didn't exist. Caleb never questioned my stories, which somehow made me angrier than if he'd been suspicious. His indifference felt like permission. The affair, because that's what it was, even though we hadn't slept together, made me feel powerful again, desirable, interesting, all the things I'd stopped feeling at home. I began posting more on social media, photos from my nights out, cryptic quotes about knowing your worth, and not settling for less than you deserve. I changed my profile picture to one Jason had taken of me at the park, where I looked younger and happier than I had in years. "You look good," Caleb said one morning, noticing my new haircut and the dress I'd bought specifically because Jason had complimented my legs. "Thank you," I said, waiting for him to ask more questions. He didn't. That weekend, Jason invited me to a gallery opening. "Come with me," he said. "When's the last time your husband took you somewhere cultural?" I couldn't remember. Caleb's idea of a cultural event was the annual Historical Society fundraiser, which was about as exciting as it sounded. "I'll be there," I said. I told Caleb I was going out with work friends again. He nodded absently, more focused on the stack of papers he was organizing at the kitchen table. "What's all that?" I asked. "Just getting some things in order," he said. "Financial documents, insurance papers, that sort of thing." "Why?" "It's good to stay organized." The gallery opening was everything I'd been missing. Interesting people, stimulating conversation, wine and cheese, and the feeling of being part of something sophisticated. Jason introduced me as his friend Ivadne, and I loved the way it sounded, like I was my own person, not just someone's wife. We were looking at a particularly striking photograph when Jason's hand found mine. "This could be us," he said quietly, "if you wanted it to be." "What do you mean?" "I mean you don't have to stay in a marriage that makes you miserable. You could choose something different, someone who appreciates you." "It's complicated." "It's only as complicated as you make it." That night, I posted a photo from the gallery. Jason had taken it, me standing in front of a piece about transformation and new beginnings, looking contemplative and artistic. I captioned it, "Sometimes you have to lose yourself to find yourself." Within an hour, it had dozens of likes and comments from people I hadn't heard from in months. Everyone wanted to know about my new sophisticated phase and where I'd been hiding this interesting side of myself. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was winning. But when I got home, Caleb was waiting in the living room with his laptop open. "Nice photo," he said. "Thanks." "Jason's a good photographer." My blood turned cold. "What?" "Jason Mitchell, freelance photographer. He tagged the gallery in his story, and you were in several of his shots. You two looked close." I felt like I'd been caught shoplifting. "He's just a friend." "Is he?" "Yes." Caleb turned his laptop around so I could see the screen. He'd pulled up Jason's Instagram account, scrolling through weeks of photos. Me at the cafe, laughing at something off camera. Me in the park, looking dreamy and romantic. Me at various events and locations I'd told Caleb I was attending with other people. "You've been lying to me," he said quietly. "I've been making friends, something you encouraged me to do. I encouraged you to have your own social life. I didn't encourage you to have a secret relationship with another man." "It's not a relationship." "What would you call it?" I couldn't answer that question honestly, without admitting to things I wasn't ready to admit. I call it having someone in my life who actually appreciates me. And I don't. "When's the last time you told me I looked beautiful? When's the last time you took me somewhere interesting? When's the last time you acted like you were happy to be married to me? When's the last time you gave me a reason to be?" The question hung between us like a blade. So this is my fault. This is both our faults, but only one of us is dealing with it by lying and cheating. I'm not cheating. Aren't you? Emotional affairs are still affairs, Ivadne. Secret meetings, intimate conversations, lying about where you are and who you're with. What would you call that? I wanted to argue, but the evidence was right there on his laptop screen. Weeks of deception laid out in carefully curated Instagram posts. "I want a divorce," I said suddenly. The words came out before I'd consciously decided to say them, but once they were out there, they felt right. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" I've been expecting this conversation for weeks. You have? Ever since you started staying out late and lying about where you were. Ever since you started dressing up for everyone except me. Ever since you started treating our marriage like a burden you couldn't wait to escape. He closed his laptop and stood up. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight. Tomorrow we can discuss the practical arrangements. That's it. What else would there be? I don't know. A fight? An attempt to save our marriage? Something. You just told me you want to divorce while standing in our living room wearing a dress you bought to impress another man. What exactly am I supposed to fight for? He headed toward the stairs, then paused. For what it's worth, I hope Jason makes you happy. You deserve to be happy, Ivadne. We both do. Just not with each other. I stood alone in our living room, surrounded by 5 years of shared life, and realized I'd gotten exactly what I'd asked for. The freedom to swap him out. So why did it feel like I'd just lost something irreplaceable? The morning after, I woke hollow. Caleb sat at the kitchen table with coffee and a legal pad, dividing assets methodically. I've called a lawyer, he said calmly. How long have you known? I asked. Since you told your friends you could swap me out any time. Maybe longer. He showed folders, screenshots of flirtatious texts with Jason, social media posts criticizing our marriage, credit card charges contradicting my lies. You've been having an emotional affair, he said. I've been protecting myself. He wasn't angry, just resigned, relieved. I'm tired of trying to love someone who sees me as an obstacle. Over weeks, he processed the divorce efficiently. No fault, clean split. I begged for another chance, but he refused. Forgiveness doesn't mean rebuilding with someone who doesn't want this marriage. Jason and I lasted 3 months before his novelty wore thin. Meanwhile, Caleb engaged Amanda. They looked genuinely happy together. I joked I could swap him out any time. I did. He swapped me out too. What I lost wasn't just a husband, but a steady, loyal partner I'd undervalued until he was gone. Some choices can't be undone. Some better turns out to be illusion. And regrets are forever.